Here's 9 things to consider for better photography when kayaking. For those of you that are avid photographers, some of these might seem very obvious, but I'm hopeful that there will be some tips peppered in throughout the video that might help you make decisions when you're getting ready to go on the water and take photos. And for those of you that are just getting into photography and just want to bring a camera when you're out on the water, I'm hopeful that some of these tips will help you make some decisions as you decide what you want to do next. The first thing I wanted to mention, and I have touched this in a couple of other videos in the past, it's that photography, especially when on a kayak, it's all about compromise. Photography is already about compromises in other aspects. If you're hiking, if you're going on a trip, you always have to think about what equipment you're bringing with you. Is it going to be too heavy? Is it going to be cumbersome? How many lenses? What type of camera? All those things come up in general. But then when you add water, the possibility of dropping it in the water, the possibility of hitting waves and ruining the camera, how are you going to keep it dry? Where are you going to store it while you're paddling? How are you going to be able to access it while you're paddling? All of those things, once you're in a kayak, they change photography quite a bit and just the experience overall, especially if you're looking to really get high quality, high level photos where you might bring a really great camera and a really good lens and usually a big tripod and set things up and take your time and frame things just right. When you're in a kayak, that doesn't really happen as much. If there's wind, if there's currents, you're going to be moving around the entire time. You're not going to be able to take photos in low light the same way. And so that's where I think that it's just really all about compromises, because first you need to decide what you want to shoot, how you want to shoot it, and then you're going to make all these other decisions around it. There's all these sayings, we're all between swims, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And for photography, the one is usually the best camera is the one in your hands, or the best camera is the one with you. So for this first one, just decide what you want to shoot, and then you'll end up making compromises all around it. So next, let's talk about how high the quality of your gear and the photography you want to do versus waterproofing and the risks of getting that equipment wet. We want to get a really awesome photo of wildlife, or we want to get a really great photo of the group doing something amazing, but unless you're on the beach or unless you're out of the water, you might not feel comfortable taking out a very expensive camera or a very expensive lens. And don't get me wrong, if you're traveling, you're hiking, you are looking at the weather. You're not going to be bringing out a big expensive system if it might be storming or hailing or raining outside. But it's just so different being so exposed in a kayak to the elements, not only to rain and whatever's happening with the weather, but also whatever's happening within the kayak itself. How comfortable are you using both hands with an expensive camera system if there's a chance the wind might knock you over? Or because while you're taking a picture, especially if you're taking a picture with two hands, your hands are not on the paddle. You're going to be sitting, balancing, and you're going to be really exposed to whatever the environment is doing to you. So while that might seem obvious, sometimes when we're prepping for a trip, and we think, well, I'm going to go see wildlife, you might not be thinking, well, what are the waves going to be doing that day? What is the current going to be doing? How are you going to feel launching into surf and landing afterwards? So first we're setting up all the risks and trying to decide what we want to shoot, how we want to shoot it, what kind of system we want to bring with us. Now let's talk about tips in how to make that happen. Third, storage. That's something that for as long as I've kayaked and as long as I've paddled with friends that are also photographers, it's something we just go back and forth constantly, trying to come up with new ways of keeping our expensive gear dry while we're paddling. There's so many different options, and it's up to you to decide what you feel most comfortable with. Once again, it's about compromises, because some things might be able to keep your equipment super dry, but they might be really hard to get to. And then others might be super easy to get to, but then there might be more risks that water could get in if something goes wrong. So the 4 main ways that I have kept my gear dry, and I've seen and I've had friends and other colleagues keep their gear dry, are dry bags of some sort that you put in your hatches, a deck bag that is somewhat watertight, a deck box that is watertight, or is there waterproofing that can be applied to the camera itself? Those are the main ones. Obviously, depending on other types of cameras you might have, if you have a GoPro, if you have a 360 camera, those might already be waterproof. And let's take a moment to discuss those straight up waterproof cameras in general, because in the past, those cameras could really not rival, let's say DSLRs or mirrorless or just having a nice big lens that you can use. And I'm not saying they can rival them now, but it just really depends on the type of photography you want to do. Let's say you're in a beautiful landscape, you're paddling in a fjord, and you just want to capture all of the nature around you. Any point and shoot or mobile or phone camera now or GoPro would be able to capture an amazing vista in super ridiculously high quality. I mean, phones are now also taking raw photos. All of the different little action cameras also take raw photos. The sensors are getting bigger every day. But going back to upping your game as a photographer, if you have a DSLR, if you have a mirrorless camera, if you have something that has a lens on it, and you want to bring it kayaking, well, then let's continue discussing ways to keep them dry. So dry bag that usually goes in a hatch, while that can prove to be waterproof, it might be hard to get to. That means for any time you want to take a picture, you have to stop. You have to go digging in either, if you have a day hatch, that's usually where it might be kept, or sometimes people just put them in their cockpit. Keep in mind that if it's in the cockpit and you take a swim, you better be sure that that dry bag, that you trusted enough for it to either float around with your equipment in there and for water not to get in. So another option is using a deck bag. These are overall pretty dry. They're the kind usually that you fold down just like a dry bag. What's nice about them is that being on your deck, it's very easy to access your equipment versus having to go through and try to find them inside your kayak. On the other hand, they're not the most waterproof thing out there. If you take a swim, if the kayak goes upside down, it'll be as good as the bag is watertight. Do you put a dry bag inside of your deck bag? That's up to you to decide on the risks and figure out if that's how you want to go. That another thing to remember is that if you have something on your deck, that will be affected by the wind. Another way to do it is to use an actual dry box, let's say a Pelican case or something like that, that can be same thing. My buddy Jorge has been using these for years, and that's his way to do it. It's cumbersome, it gets in the way, it's bulky, but at the same time, it makes it very easy to just pop it open, get the camera, take a quick shot, put it away, seal it, and you know that it will be mostly dry. Pros and cons. So for me, when I go out in the water, if I know it's going to be a really peaceful day, and I just want access to a really nice lens, to a camera with a really nice lens, then I'll probably take the box. But if I'm going surfing or if I'm going out in rough water, I will not take that box. The last option for a nice camera system is, depending on whatever camera system you have, finding some kind of either dive housing or waterproofing that will go specifically to your camera system. This is also cumbersome. It's heavy, it's annoying, but this is usually what I use to go in rough water, because that way I can have something that's pretty nice, and I know that I can have it out with me in rough water. I have it set up so I can easily put it in and out of my day hatch. It's padded out specifically to that case. Once again, with those compromises, I am very limited in what lenses I can put inside that case and how I can use those lenses. Also, the case itself is very cumbersome. You can't really work with settings. You can't see the screen. You can't frame your shot. You can't change modes easily, figuring that stuff out beforehand and then deciding what you want to do. If you're just getting into kayaking, I'm hopeful that some of these stories or ideas might help you pick one direction to go in, depending on what you want to do. And then maybe you can think about options on how to do that. And if you already have a very established camera system that you love and you've been shooting for years, maybe you can make some choices on how to keep it dry so that you feel more comfortable bringing it out in the water. All right, so next, let's talk about the weight of your camera system, extra lenses, things you might bring with you. I have been on countless outings where I'll bring so much gear and use almost none of it. I'll take a big system with a big lens with all these ideas in my head, and then I end up using whatever I had in my hand the whole time. In our circumnavigation in Norway, I had taken two main systems. One was the little mirrorless that I'm using right now to record, as well as I borrowed from work a really nice top-level Canon camera with two L-series lenses. One of them that was my favorite was a 50mm 1.2. That system, that camera system, stayed double-bagged at the bottom of one of my hatches the entire trip. Every time we got out to camp, every time we got out of the kayaks, I was too tired to go digging to find the heavy camera to then bring it out and take pictures. I just took the little mirrorless that I already had in my hand for the whole day, put on a different lens, and just used that for the rest of the time. And you know how it is. Lenses come in all sorts of sizes and weights, and are you really going to use every single lens you brought? You know that idea when you're packing to go camping where you make two piles, things you definitely need and things you think you need, and then you leave the pile of things you think you need just home? That's how it is with photography. Whatever you think you might do, you probably won't. So make those decisions of what you want to shoot and then take as little equipment as you can. The other thing that I really like doing is committing to a specific system depending on what it is I want to get out of it. When I was working on my photography book, I had wanted very badly to reconnect with taking photos with film. So then what I did is I committed to taking the heavy film system, let's say on an outing where I had nothing else to grab. If I wanted to take a picture, I was forced to use whatever it is I brought. So this camera with whatever film I had with one lens only. And that way I was getting exactly what I wanted. If I had taken, let's say, the little mirrorless and I had this packed away in a bag, this probably would have stayed in the bag the entire time, and whatever the easiest camera would be, that's the one I probably would have used on the trip. If you're taking a camera system with lenses, let's discuss some of the pros and cons in zoom lenses versus prime lenses. Now, if you're already an avid photographer, this is going to be very obvious. If you're just getting into photography, I'm not going to describe it too much in the detail, but I'll just mention a couple of things in each so that you can make a decision if you're thinking about getting a new lens. Zoom lenses are very useful in allow you to have lots of different focal lengths, and then once you're stationary, you get a lot of different choice in the photo you might be able to take. On the other hand, a prime lens will give you a completely different feel depending on what you want to do with it. A prime lens is a fixed focal length, but it allows you to have a very shallow depth of field if that's something you want to do, if you want to take portraits while on the water, or if you wanted to take very fast photos. That's one of the things that I usually gravitate towards. If I'm taking pictures of my friends on waves, I want super fast photos so I can capture all of the really cool motion of the water and the waves. And so I might go for a prime lens. Prime lenses are also very fast. They catch a lot of light at once, and so they need less time to take the same photo than, let's say, a zoom lens that just doesn't have the ability to go as low with its aperture. Do some research between prime lenses and zoom lenses and then decide if I'm taking pictures of friends, if I'm taking portraits or taking really fast photos, I usually go for a prime lens. If I'm taking pictures of wildlife or let's say a group and I want to paddle ahead and turn around and then have quite a bit of time for them to paddle by and have lots of different shots to take, I'll go for a zoom lens. For the next tip is thinking about image quality and in terms of cropping and reframing. If you've ever shot film, you usually want to do as much of the work and decide on everything before you take the photo. With digital photography, it makes it a lot easier to just take photos all over the place and then you pick the one you want. Now, with kayaking, sometimes we don't get to frame the photo exactly how we want when we're on the water. The kayak is constantly moving. The wind is shifting us around. Very often, I'm not even looking at framing the photo because I'm looking to see if there's a wave coming or I'm keeping an eye on whatever's happening next. Sometimes I'll shoot in the highest possible image quality, knowing that when I get home, I might reframe that photo slightly, or I might crop it in a little bit, because let's be honest, it might not be perfectly level. It might not be perfectly centered on my subject. When kayaking, sometimes you need to do some of that work afterwards, because in the moment, it's very hard to make everything come together perfectly. It's also funny. A lot of times I'll get off the water and I start going through my photos, and I don't want to share them with anyone yet, because I know the photo ultimately will look very different than what I shot. Along with that is another thing that the newer cameras allow us to do. I mean, it's been around forever, but it used to be a waste of film, and that is using burst modes where, let's say with GoPros or any of these other cameras, you can set it up so it can take bursts of 3 photos, bursts of 10 photos. Sometimes they could just be continuous. Let's say you're surfing, or you're in rough water, or you're taking photos of wildlife and you're getting a bird that's flying by. It might be hard to have the one perfect shot. It might be easier to set it in bursts. If I'm swimming in the water as friends are surfing around me, a lot of times I'll put it in bursts so that as they come by, I'm able to take a couple of photos all in a row, and then I try to find the one that I think captured the moment that I was hoping for. With GoPros and action cameras, that's a very easy thing to do. A lot of times you can set it up so that it can automatically take the 30 photos or 60 photos. Yes, you have tons and tons and tons of photos, but you might be able to catch that one fantastic moment on a wave. It's almost impossible to catch otherwise. Being able to trigger the photo burst to start right as you're catching a wave, and then for those first 2 seconds as you drop into the wave, it's going to catch some really unique moments. And every type of camera has some kind of burst mode. I think maybe point and shoots might not, but most will have that. So up to you to use however you'd like. I do use them quite often. The second to last tip I wanted to mention which is something that I fall into the trap of all the time, so I make sure I do this, and that is deciding and punching in your settings before your trip, or before you get on the water, or before you're leaving your house. Put in the settings for that day. It's very easy to forget to do those things when you're getting ready to get on the water, or when the group is ready to launch, or I hate being the person that's still on the shore, playing with my camera instead of just enjoying my time on the water or getting going. It happens to me all the time. But one of the ways I've managed to not do that anymore is I have all of the settings done at home before I get there. Or if I know it's going to take me a long time, I try to get there a little bit earlier. Play with the cameras, put them away, and once we're ready to launch, I don't have to touch any of those things. Another thing is a lot of the nicer cameras will have memory settings. You can put in different profiles, and that way you can access your settings easily without having to go and manually change things every time. And the last one, and I know this was a long video, I really love photography, and I'm hopeful that some of these will help others that are either getting into kayaking, getting into photography, both, or maybe you've done both for a long time, but you've never felt comfortable taking your camera out on the water. But the last one is to have fun. The whole reason we kayak, the whole reason we take photos is to have fun, to be able to remember some of those moments. It's very easy to get carried away and then only use the camera. It happens to me all the time. And for 2022, in my last video, I just mentioned how much last year I put the camera away, or I just didn't bring it on the trip. I wanted to reconnect with people. I wanted to reconnect with my love of being on the water, of traveling. And one of the ways I did it is by leaving the camera home. But I can't deny how much fun I have when I bring the camera along, and how much fun I have sharing those moments with others when we're doing fun things, or taking photos of nature. I love doing that. If you're getting frustrated with settings, if you're getting frustrated with not getting the camera out enough, don't forget that it's still all about having fun. One of my best buds, Jorge, we would take photography specific trips and outings whenever we would get a new piece of kit, or we would get a new lens and we wanted to test it, we wouldn't go with anyone else because everyone else wanted to paddle, and we would just go test that because we both really loved photography. Maybe is there a buddy or someone around you that might be able to go and enjoy and have fun with you while you're testing these things, rather than maybe your spouse who just wants to get on the water and does not want to just be waiting for you the entire time as you play with a camera. It's very often that I completely forget about a trip, or I completely forget about an adventure. And as I look back through my files, or I look back through, I mean, that's the whole reason I started that paddling mixtape idea, was to have a diary, a visual diary of adventures, and just what it means to be on the water and how it feels. And I think that visual diary is able to share that. If there's any questions or anything you want to add, if there's techniques that have worked for you, or if there's equipment that you've used that has been really good for you, please do leave it in the comments. I hope this was helpful. Subscribe if you like. As always, look on Kayak Hipster. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.